I'm really excited to be talking with Janis Weller. Jan is a nationally board certified health and wellness coach and career counselor. For 10 years, she served as associate dean and head of the liberal arts department at McNally Smith College of Music in St. Paul, Minnesota. In 2019, she co authored the book Life in the Real World, Making Music Graduates Employable. Jan is a flautist and a writer, and she is someone I consider one of my mentors. We kind of had a slow burn of getting to know each other and seeing each other in meetings and on committees, and I think though probably sometime within that first year, uh, we both kind of like recognize that like this is another person for us to
Yeah.
to to do cool work with and to talk about things, and that can be an ally in kind of moving forward in the ways that we thought were best to move forward for our school and for our students and all of that. And over the years, Jan has given me really great advice and counsel, and she's put her uh, she stuck her neck out for me multiple times, writing recommendations and all of that. And so I wanted to interview her as part of this series on mentorship. So Jan, that was a very long, awkward introduction, just as I promised. But welcome and thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. Happy to be here, Charlie.
I have these questions for you that we've kind of just been editing together, which is another great another great example of mentorship that you've given me. But we have some questions here, and I think we'll just kind of jump right in. Maybe kind of starting with like we were talking about before, like kind of maybe a more kind of overarching, wider view of what mentorship means to you, and maybe kind of what you might like, kind of what you've wanted and expected from your mentors, but also maybe kind of like what you've expected and wanted from your mentees.
Right. Wow. Big questions, Charlie, as always.
Go for it.
Yeah. No, I love how you stimulate me to think about lots of different things in different ways. And I really appreciate that. I miss working with you. Those were good times. And sometimes the best ones are the casual conversation in the hallway where you really can get into the deep stuff. So too, but I really love your definition of mentoring and that sort of comparison between a teacher um, who imparts knowledge and a mentor who serves as a guide and source of support. And for for me, that's seeing the student as a whole person, and that's been kind of the centerpiece of a lot of my research over the years. Is really the whole musician was the title of my master's thesis. So I really resonate with that idea. Um, and the skills that you are interested in imparting to students, the critical thinking, the creative problem solving, are totally transferable to life, of course, and not just music. So I think that's obvious to you. It's obvious to me. It provides also, I think, on a musical level, it provides more authenticity and more depth to performance and to songwriting, all those sorts of things. If you kind of are seeing that activity as part of you as a whole, not just something that you've layered on top somehow too. So, but of course, not all private music instructors or music instructors in general are mentors, and some are very consciously not. They may see their role as mostly imparting knowledge, and don't really have a lot of desire to connect on a personal level, too. So recognizing that, I think, is important. It's also maybe a different style, not only a different style of teaching, but a different style of learning as well. And so mentoring may suit some people more than others, although everybody can benefit from it for sure. Um, so yeah, so a teacher who mostly sees teaching as, technique and artistry and performance and repertoire and those sorts of things, may get sort of annoyed at the idea of, well, I'm not a psychologist, or they need to toughen up, or somebody else can help with that, that sort of thing too. And I don't want to set that aside necessarily, but it is a reality. Um, And I think you said in your article too, your first article, that the private lesson environment is really intense and personal and intimate. And you acknowledge that that's a scary way to frame it, but it's real. Um, and it can be abused. So finding those boundaries and defining those boundaries are really important, I think, too. Um, so yeah, some people will dig it and other people may thrive in a different environment. I think to recognize that is just fine. It even made me think that, especially with younger students, mentoring may feel a little parental in some ways. And maybe that's a good thing, you know, as they make a transition to being on their own for the first time, or maybe not, you know, one way or the other too. So, I appreciate being given the opportunity to think about mentoring in a broader and deeper way than maybe I have for a while.
Like the parental or like the family mentorship thing is also something I've kind of been thinking about. You know, I think I've kind of set that aside a little bit in thinking specifically about this, just because of, you know, kind of the goal of like 4A music and all that kind of stuff is kind of not necessarily about like, you know, uh, getting the most out of your relationship with your grandfather.
Right. Yeah. Right. I don't want to go too far away.
Yeah. But it really does kind of mirror the things that you get from, you know, whoever it is that's raising you, like whether, and whoever those people are and whatever sort of relationships those are. And I know that those kind of things are different for everybody and change over time, but
it's expectations and independence and you know, reliance on someone else as opposed to being more independent. You know, what is the goal, and what is the student expecting in that way too. And part of it in music especially is that most students come to music school having had lessons before, and it's not a brand new experience, but it may be certainly going to be a different experience.
So the next kind of question is kind of breaking this down, but you know, the second thing I'm writing about is basically how to be a better mentor, and so, and kind of like what maybe what are some of the pieces of that, or what are some of the things that you can do or not do, I guess, to be a better mentor.
Sure.
But like, so my second question is, what are the components of a positive and productive mentorship?
Right. I really see mentoring as reciprocal, I guess. And I think I know that I've gained as much from my mentoring relationships as I have from being mentored too. So I really do see it as a reciprocal activity. And I think that's helpful for the student or the mentee to understand too, that this is not a one-way street, that I don't have all the answers, that our conversations are going to help us lead to new places, you know, that sort of thing too. So first thing I was thinking about in this arena is how important mutual respect is for really fostering that relationship. That it doesn't necessarily appear like you're talking about. It's not a hierarchical necessarily, but there are some components of it that are certainly hierarchical too. But that mutual respect, I think, is really important. Connected to that really closely is the importance of clear communication too. So to really help students beyond the syllabus statement, I think it's great that you have that in your syllabus, but to make sure that you both are thinking about it in a similar way, that they're not making assumptions, you're not making assumptions, not you specifically, but the teacher, with a goal of ultimately, I think, of creating a safe space where that real personal development can happen in a way that's really genuine and not creepy. And you know, feels important in that way too. Again, connected to that, I would say the importance of really good listening on both parts. And along, I always think of listening and hearing as being two different things, closely related, but not inevitable there too. So really hearing your mentee, but really hearing your mentor as well too. And if it's not clear, that goes back to the communication piece, right? Really making sure that you spend some time sorting through those kinds of things so that you really understand that. And then the last thing I thought I would mention is just the idea of a certain chemistry between relationships. So what wonder what draws you to that person. And this is, both directions, however you're thinking about it. And I don't think you necessarily have to like the person, but you do have to respect them. And I think it helps if there is some kind of spark there that can really, really fuel the relationship and keep it going even when it's hard. So I've certainly had mentors, as I look back, that are, they weren't always somebody that I really liked personally, but that I knew I was going to learn from. And vice versa with mentees too. Sometimes it's harder if you don't feel, if you don't like them, I guess. But that mutual spark that you can see, okay, this is going to be good. It's going to challenge me, or it's going to make me think outside of the way. It's not just going to reinforce what I already think, but I'm going to get challenged by this too. So those are just four ideas that had come to mind kind of quickly as being component parts of mentoring.
No, that's beautiful. I really appreciate that too, because I feel like almost all of those are kind of like were not 100% exactly the things that I had like bullet pointed, but they're like the pieces that kind of fit in between some of those. Those ideas make my ideas feel a little bit more complete, which
good.
which is really great. Yeah. That's what I was thinking about as you were talking. The two last ones in particular are, just to follow up a little bit, like so the first one is listening, or the first one I just wanted to mention was listening, and like I've been thinking a lot about the mentorship relationship like really being driven by like asking questions, like not necessarily in a Socratic method way, but it as the flip of like providing answers, it's like asking questions bit of it. And I think really I think the way that you ask better questions is you listen in between, you know what I mean? Like the follow up question is that, I think that's how I can usually tell if someone's like listening to me, like as I'm talking. It's like, what are they going to ask next? Is it going to like incorporate some of what I've just said? Is it going to like ask me to clarify something, or like, or or reconsider something I just said, and so that, I think that's a really important part of that. And then the part about I think what the last thing you said was kind of like not like you don't have to like your mentor or mentee or something like that. I think that's really interesting, because I think liking somebody is kind of, I don't know. It's hard for me to define that really. It's like so you can have mutual respect for somebody. You can think they're maybe like brilliant or interesting or whatever that is, and then you kind of want to spend time with them. It's kind of about like how the kind of time you would want to spend with somebody or something.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I would think that like a mentorship relationship would, and I think it's okay, but it could be limited by like just not wanting to spend time with the other person, like that seeming unbearable or not pleasant, like you talk about kind of like the casual conversations in the hallway, but there's also like let's go get coffee, or I'm walking over to this place, do you want to walk with me? That doesn't happen if that relationship is rough, for lack of a better word, or something.
Yeah, I probably missed that more than anything through the pandemic, because I think I've thought often about our time at McNally and how much I gained from the hallway conversations and also the coffee conversations. There's something about just sitting down in a relaxed way, not in a studio, not in a meeting, but spending time with somebody, and you can sort of not only watch the relaxation, but also kind of watch the opening that can engender. So I really appreciate that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I have a 15-minute break or something. Like, I'm going to go on a walk and
Uh-huh.
just see if Jan's door is open.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And if she's in there,
Yeah.
it's like, come in and you're like, hey, Jan, so I'm thinking about this weird thing. And you're like, okay, give me a second to like, to
Shift
follow like
gears.
what you're trying to do. And I'm just like, okay, I'm like already like 3 hours into this idea. Like,
Yeah.
just like,
Right.
you're like, okay, that sounds cool. Good luck.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, yeah. Great. I don't know. I probably have like a number of follow-up questions for each of the things you said, but I think that's really wonderful. And I can't wait to incorporate that into all of the things that I'm writing and thinking about.
Yeah.
But I will move on to the next question just so that
Okay.
I said this is going to be 20 minutes
Interest of
and
time. Yeah,
it is very
sure.
much not being 20 minutes. So the third question was, how has your concept of mentorship changed over time?
Yeah, that was a really interesting question, because to be perfectly honest, I don't think I've used that word a lot until relatively recently. And so a lot of my reflection on examples that we'll get to later on are people I wouldn't necessarily have labeled as a mentor at the time, but was somebody I was interacting with regularly who was giving me, helping me with whatever it was I was doing. So I really, I appreciate the sort of framing and shaping of this idea too. So I think for me, a lot of mentoring has been just the way I like to interact with people in general, to see them as whole people and interesting, and see how all parts of their lives fit together and to who they are at that point too. So it's been sort of organic, I guess. And then it's been interesting over time to start to really reflect back and think about, oh yeah, that person really was a mentor. Because for a long time, I didn't think I had mentors necessarily. I had teachers I liked or, got more from, and ones that I didn't, but I always learned something from the ones I didn't, connect with too. So it's sort of, yeah, I guess organic's the easiest way for me to think about mentorship. And it's sort of evolving out of the people that you align yourself with, and the way you respond to them.
Yeah, I mean that was something too that there's like the uptick or whatever in the use of that word, even like from
Mm-hmm.
it seems like the kind of mid to late 70s or something, at least in kind of like in English literature, but where it kind of pops up, and now it seems like something that people talk about all the time. But I wonder if is there like for someone who's been teaching for a while, like was there a point like where that started to pop into like can you put your thumb on any of that, like where that kind of term started to
Yeah,
pop up a little bit more?
that's interesting. I think when I actually started to take the ideas that I've been thinking about for a long time, regarding the whole musician and teaching and what was working, um, that started really with something called the Prelude program at McPhail, which was for high school students that were really motivated in music. And I really started to see that opportunity, the mentoring opportunity, and that really became a centerpiece of that program. And I've stayed in touch with a number of those students, and that was a long time ago. And then that evolved into the career development course that I taught at a number of different institutions and all too. So that too, oftentimes I found that the students weren't really ready to identify mentors in their lives necessarily. And where I've seen it come back is when I hear from them later, sometimes years later, and they say, oh my gosh, I wasn't ready for your class, or I wasn't ready for some of the things that we needed to do for the class that I thought was dumb or whatever. And now I get it, something like that. So I think that goes to maybe some other things that we'll talk about. But I think that idea of staying connected somehow, because oftentimes I think as mentors, we don't necessarily see the fruits of our efforts right away, because everybody's developing at their own pace and timeline and stuff too. So I guess it would be, to go back to your last question, I think it would have a lot to do with developing curriculum that kind of looked at these component parts of helping students look at themselves first, and then try to find pathways that were going to resonate with them from a personal level, rather than thinking about it from my teacher thinks I should do this, or my parents think I should do that, but that they can really start to own their strengths and goals and interests and that kind of stuff too.
So my last big full question is, if you could share some of your personal experiences with mentors or mentees, and what were those interactions like? How did they start? How did they end?
Mm-hmm.
I think in particular, a thing that a lot of people probably, especially younger folks that are really looking for that kind of mentorship relationship, is that starting of the relationship can be kind of like really tricky. And you've already said the word organic a lot, so maybe there's just something about
Mm-hmm.
that just kind of slowly kind of comes into focus. But yeah, I'm not going to elaborate on my big question with even more questions. But so what were you thinking about in terms of some personal experiences?
Yeah, that like I said, that's been a really interesting exercise to look back. And I guess I would start by saying my main mentor from my master's program just passed away this week. And she was a very unique person. But she came into my life at a time where I was just like exploding with ideas that were just all over the place. And so I look back at what I wrote during that time, and it's just a mess. But I was percolating and stuff, and that never fazed her. She just sort of said, let's do this. Go down this path. And then she helped me focus as much as I could at that stage of the game. And then she continued to do that. So this is a long range one. 2 months ago, I got a letter from her. She's very old school, no email, no texting. It was like a handwritten letter in the mail that she had at a wedding had run into a former student of mine and somehow put it together, and just wanted to share what this guy had said about my class 15 years ago. And I thought, as a mentor, it was such a day brightener. It was really great to get a letter like that. And then, a month later, I got a form letter saying that, she'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness and just passed away this week. So this all happened within the last couple of months. So it really made me think, because when I got the first letter, I had to respond back to her with a handwritten letter, because it's the only way I can contact her, which is not the easiest way for me to operate. But I'm so glad I did, right? And that gave me an opportunity to tell her how impactful her mentoring was for me, and that the timing was really good for her to step into my life at that point. So that kind of checked a lot of boxes for me about mentorship, and that idea of continuing them. My doctoral advisor and mentor was quite a different story. She was really rigorous and really tough. But once she could see I had made the commitment to finish, she was all in. And I appreciated that so much. I learned a tremendous amount. And sometimes it was pretty brutal and overwhelming, but it needed to be done, and she knew how to do that. And so I appreciate that. Very different from the sort of nurturing master's mentor approach. And maybe, I was drawn to her for a number of different reasons, kind of going back to that idea of chemistry and that kind of thing. But she was also really hard. As far as mentees go, I have a really interesting experience. I call him an accidental mentee. It was a student who needed my class to graduate. It was the last class he needed. He took it and failed it twice, showed up for the third time. I thought, oh crap, here we go. We butted heads like crazy. He's a very smart guy, very capable, wonderful musician. He just couldn't hold it together. And so he would come to class for a couple of weeks and then he'd disappear. But this time, the third time, I thought, no, we've got to make this happen. So I took him aside after class and I said, we're going to do this differently. You don't have to come to class. We're going to meet one-on-one. And we set up this time to meet in the library. And we started working on stuff. And then over time, over just a couple of meetings, he started to relax a little bit and I guess trust me a little bit. And in that meeting, I found out that he was clinically depressed, homeless, completely broke, and hungry. And that was transformative for me as a mentor or as a teacher, because I realized, how can I expect this guy to write a paper and have it turned in by noon on Friday, when the base of his Maslow's hierarchy of needs is completely chaos. So that changed the relationship that we had completely, and we did get him graduated. But the sort of poignant part to that is that I saw him a couple years later, and he was doing okay. He had a job, he had a girlfriend, and he introduced me to his girlfriend as one of my mentors at McNally. And I thought, oh, wow, I was just the teacher that was trying to get this kid out the door, kind of thing. So I think about that all the time. And that really kind of comes full circle back to this idea of we teach the whole person, not just the subject. And it sort of reinforced that, but also, it's hard. No question about that, especially these days when a lot of kids are struggling. So that's to me, it was a real powerful mentee experience.
All those examples are like, they hit really hard.
Like I said, it was good to kind of put them all in one place and realize, oh yeah, I've had a lot of different kinds of experiences along these lines too. Maybe my favorite mentor-mentee relationships have been with friends. So I tend to be drawn to people who are smarter than me and more accomplished and stuff, and learn a ton, just being part of that, those kinds of relationships, and sometimes with very different strengths and sometimes in different fields, but I really, really appreciate those. And so you're certainly one of those people that fit that bill. Friends as mentors. Yeah.
Like one thing I've been thinking about is like there's this book, Mastery, that I've been reading, and that's by Robert Greene, and
right.
he's like a bit of like he kind of has like a Spartan approach to these kinds of things. Like he wrote a book called like The 48 Laws of Power.
Oh.
And he's kind of intense, like, and I don't agree with him about everything, but he kind of has like, he gives a lot of examples about mentorships ending, in which basically the mentee will kind of like that they're basically, and I think one of his kind of part of his thesis is like a mentorship should have a really clear like ending point. Like there's a point where it's like you've gotten what you need to get from your mentor, and then there's kind of like a needing to get out of the shadows. And I think it's kind of like the end of the apprenticeship or something where it's like, now you're an equal master and you can't be somebody's like, you can't be like making photocopies for somebody anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's really interesting to me because it's like, there are a lot of examples of things like that. And I think I've had some experiences like that where it's just kind of like, okay, no, you know, like I can do this now. Like I don't need that kind of a master anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like a lot of the things that we're talking about, like in a lot of the examples you described, are not seemingly not like that. Like there would maybe never really have to be some sort of ending point. I mean, I wrote about it in the first kind of article. I'm wondering what you, just as like a last question about. I mean, as I'm kind of saying that kind of stuff to you, what do you think about any of that? Like, for a mentorship to be complete, does it need to kind of have an ending?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, and not one I'd really contemplated until we started talking about it. One thing that did come to mind was that the rituals around finishing a degree, for example, like particularly the doctoral degree, right, where you go in to defend your thesis and they're all sitting around frowning at you and asking hard questions and all that stuff, and then they make you go out of the room while they deliberate, you know, and you walk the hallways or whatever, and then they invite you back in by saying, congratulations, Dr. Christensen. And I don't know about you, but that just I knew that's what was going to happen, and it just completely flummoxed me. So it was so sudden, and it obviously wasn't really sudden. It was really, really long. But that pivotal moment where you become a peer in the academic world, anyway, and I just found that really weird. But that was just me. Other than that, kind of really engineered kind of ending to a mentorship, where they literally say, you know, we're colleagues now. I tend to think that mentorships have kind of a life of their own, and distance may keep you apart, or other circumstances. But I don't necessarily think they have to end unless they're a real formal one. So if it's within an academic environment or a work environment or something like that, some boards I've been on, you know, assign a mentor or a liaison to new board members, and I've done that kind of thing before, and that's just to get somebody oriented, you know, essentially, and then move on from there. So I can see where there could be benefit to that, but I don't necessarily think it has to happen. I don't know what Green says about that.
He says a lot of things. It's his basic. Yeah. It's like, for you to live, everyone else has to die. It's kind of like a way to like summarize a lot of his writing. But the only way to ensure that you will live is if everyone else is dead. It's kind of, there are other ways to do it, but those things.
Right.
I'm paraphrasing. Well, maybe mentorships don't have to end, but this conversation should come to an end, at least to respect your time on this Sunday. But I really appreciate, Jan, you taking the time to think about this and talk to me about it, and for your continued support and all of that. And I saw that you hearted that first article. That was really great positive reinforcement for me.
I figured I didn't need to write anything. We were talking soon, so
yeah.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
No, I've always respected your ability to not only come up with really interesting ideas, but also stand by them. And sometimes that wasn't easy. And so I always learn from you too, Charlie. So it's good stuff all the way around. And yeah, I wish you well with the next stages of this exploration of mentorship.
Thank you, Jan.
Yeah, you bet.
Cool. Okay, boom.